Gonzaga's 2025 class has its first member after Davis Fogle committed on Independence Day, reminding everybody that the Zags got dudes.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, happy Independence Day weekend, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics, and we got news for you all today. America's team, according to the great Neil Everett, landed a commitment on the 4th of July. Perfect timing. Davis Fogle commits to Gonzaga. We're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about what he had to say about the Zags, what his role might look like in a Gonzaga uniform. We're also going to talk about what it means for the other players Gonzaga is pursuing in the 2025 recruiting class. We're going to close out the show talking about Drew Timme, who we have an update on regarding his health and his status for NBA Summer League. And we're going to also talk about 2 new coaches joining the women's basketball staff to close out the show. But let's start with the big headline. Davis Fogle, 2025 top 40 recruit, according to multiple services, has committed to the Gonzaga Bulldogs after visiting Spokane over Hoopfest weekend. There was a lot of smoke that this was going to happen. It felt like as soon as Gonzaga showed enough interest to get Fogle onto campus, that a commitment was coming shortly thereafter. That ended up being exactly the case. Fogle picked Gonzaga over a top 3 that included Kansas and Creighton. Both those schools had made offers to him. He had not visited either program. So as soon as we saw that top 3, it felt fairly likely, especially with the top 3 coming out and an announcement that he was planning to make his decision soon. You kind of read between the tea leaves there, see a player who's got a top 3. He's visited one of those 3 schools. He's suddenly decided to make an announcement very quickly after visiting. It's not too hard to put together the pieces here and make an assumption that he's going to end up picking Gonzaga, which is exactly what happened. Now, Kansas and Creighton were not the only two other schools that had interest in Fogle. He had an offer and a visit with Nebraska. He had offers from Indiana, from LSU, St. John's, Texas Tech, Cincinnati, Boise State, among others. He was a player that was highly pursued by a lot of different teams throughout his throughout his high school career. But Fogle said he felt right at home in Spokane at Gonzaga over Hoopfest weekend. That's not a surprise. He is a native of the west side of the state in Anacortes, Washington, the northwest corner, effectively, of the state of Washington. Small school out there, but had interest in Gonzaga in the past, had gone to camps and stuff as a younger kid. So not a huge surprise to see him commit here. This is the quote that I pulled from an article written by Joe Tipton at On3 Sports after Fogle's commitment. Fogle said, quote, "Their player development is top notch, and that is really sticking out about them. They've come to see me at home like 3 times. They've come to see my workout at my high school twice. I mean, we have definitely grown a strong relationship. They like my scoring and my offensive skill set. They think I can fit really well with their play style." We'll get into a little bit more about what Fogle's role might look like at Gonzaga a bit later in the show, but just a bit more about him. Again, for those everyday listeners, you've heard quite a bit about Davis Fogle. We've talked about him 4, 5, 6 times or so on this show in the last couple of weeks as he's gradually become more of a priority target for Mark Few and the Gonzaga coaching staff. Fogle is currently a 6'7" guard from Anacortes, Washington. I say currently because he was 6'5" a few months ago, at least listed at 6'5" a few months ago. So a player who's grown in stature, and I think that impacts a lot of the performances we've seen from him on the summer circuit. Some of the stuff is probably some growing pains, quite literally, for Davis Fogle, but the added size certainly is an positive impact for Gonzaga once he kind of fills out and finds his strength and gets his balance a little bit more under control. But he's been at Anacortes High School. He's going to play his senior season at Compass Prep in Arizona, a high-level basketball factory. Tons of fantastic players have come out of Compass Prep. I think that's going to help him in the sense that he was at a 2A school in the state of Washington. Like, he is going to now, he had the ball in his hands a bunch. He was the guy for Anacortes High School, and now he has an opportunity to adjust to being more of a role player, an off-ball player. He doesn't have to have the ball in his hands. He's not commanding all of the attention from the opposing defenses. And I think the transition to playing at Compass Prep will help him be more prepared for what his role is going to look like at Gonzaga, because Gonzaga's not giving him the basketball on day one and saying, here, you're our point guard, you're the guy with the ball in his hands, you're driving the offense. That's not going to be his role probably ever at Gonzaga. That's not what they're recruiting him for. That's not what they committed him for. So I think getting this opportunity at Compass Prep will help him find that role. And it may be a challenge. Like I'm optimistic he'll have a good year at Compass Prep, but if he struggles, if we see some of those growing pains for him, that wouldn't be a cause for concern for me, because I still think it's better for him to be getting that opportunity to play a role that's more similar to the role he's going to play at Gonzaga. Fogle is 43rd in the composite rankings at On3 Sports. He was 33rd at 7 Sports in their individual rankings. He moved up to 38th in ESPN's very recently updated 2025 re-rankings. He is 60th at Rivals, and he is 81st at On3. So there's a lot of discrepancy in kind of how some of these highly regarded recruiting services are evaluating Fogle's talent. And I think a lot of that is because of that growth spurt and some kind of balance issues that he had while playing at Pangos All-American Camp and some of the other summer circuits that we've seen from him. He is a very good mid-range scorer. We've seen a lot of 2 to 3 dribbles, can get to a spot, can pull up, can hit a shot like that. It's not a shot Gonzaga utilizes all that often in their offense, but certainly something that if he can pump fake, attack a closeout, take 3 dribbles and hit a little mid-range or a little floater, if he can develop that, that's the kind of offensive bag that is going to be valuable for him at Gonzaga and just throughout his college career. But he does need to work on his balance. And again, you grow a couple inches suddenly when you're in high school. You got to kind of relearn how to use your body, use your size, move fluidly with the basketball. And so I think he's still just going through some of those changes. He didn't finish very well around the rim during the Pangos All-American Camp. If you guys listened to, I talked about that a little bit with Tobias Bass recently. He's got some strength he needs to put on. He's a little bit like Dusty Stromer in that regard. Their play styles are pretty different. So I don't want that to be the full-on comparison, but just in terms of being 6'6", 6'7", and being very skinny, like they're going to look somewhat similarly in that regard. And for Dusty, some of the struggles that he had last year, he didn't finish very well around the rim, in part because he needs to put some strength, some physicality on his frame. That's going to be very similar to what we're going to likely see from Davis Fogle. Now, he has a whole nother year of high school basketball to potentially gain some of that weight and put himself in a position to be a little bit better at finishing around the rim, at finishing through contact, at drawing contact, and getting to the free throw line. The outside shot has a lot of potential. I think that's an area that we would like to see him grow at Compass Prep this next year, getting more opportunities to be a catch and shoot specialist, which was not something he got to do very much at Anacortes. So can he be somebody who comes off a screen, catches the basketball, shoots without having to dribble? Can he hit threes off the dribble? How is the balance going to look in that regard? I think that the three-point shot is going to eventually be a positive for Davis Fogle, and it might be a positive as soon as his freshman year, but it is something we would want to see him grow and develop during this last season at Compass Prep. But the overall offensive package is there. Defensively, we'll see what that looks like. Again, all of this comes back to the growth spurt for him. He's longer now. He's still very skinny. He's going to need to put on weight to be an even remotely impactful defender at the collegiate level. He's going to need to get stronger, but that's the easiest thing for a coaching staff to do, is to toss you in a weight room and lock the door until you get 10, 15, 20 pounds stronger. So I'm not worried about the strength showing up. It's going to be there for Davis Fogle when they need it to be, but that is going to need to happen in order for him to be an impactful defender at the next level. So what does Davis Fogle committing mean for Gonzaga? What does it mean for their 2025 targets like Isaiah Harwell and Nik Khamenia? We're going to get into that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Folks, passion, drive, patience, that's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or you get your money back, because with folks with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at all the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 2, still any patents, still Locked On Zags, still talking Davis Fogle, Anacortes native, first commitment for the Gonzaga Bulldogs in the 2025 recruiting class. Gonzaga has not landed many future recruits as of late. They did not land anybody in the 2024 recruiting class until about a month ago when Ismaila Diani from Spain committed to Gonzaga to join for the 24-25 season. They did not land any recruits from the United States during the 2025 cycle. In 2023, they landed Dusty Stromer, but it has been pretty quiet for Gonzaga on the recruiting front lately. They've utilized the transfer portal. They continue to utilize the international market last year with Pavle Stosic and Luka Krajinovic, of course, Jun-Suk Yeo. Like, they have really been heavily involved in the international players. Diani, of course, in that conversation. They've reached out to a lot of high-profile players in recruiting classes that they weren't able to land. Zoom Diallo is a notable example for 2024. Trent Perry, who's at UCLA, previous USC commit, now at UCLA. Zoom Diallo, of course, at Washington. Asa Newell was a highly regarded prospect in 2025 that the Zags were pursuing. He's going to go to Georgia instead. But we now have seen Gonzaga land somebody in 2025. Davis Fogle comes to a player who rocketed up the rankings, was a barely top 75 prospect, was not even in the top 100 prior to that, is now a top 40 prospect at 2 of the 4 major recruiting services. I suspect he's going to continue to move up the rankings for Rivals and On3 as well. And he's one of 4 targets for Gonzaga in that 2025 recruiting class. 2 of them are players we've talked about a whole bunch of times on this podcast in Isaiah Harwell and Nik Khamenia. The other one is Jalen Haralson. Let's start with Haralson because I think Fogle's commitment has the biggest impact on Gonzaga's pursuit of Jalen Haralson, in the sense that we've long expected that Jalen Haralson's not coming to Gonzaga. He's from Indiana. He's being pursued heavily by programs in Indiana, like Indiana and Purdue and Notre Dame. He's also had an offer and a visit at Auburn. He's been talking to Michigan and Michigan State. He is heavily involved in the recruitment at other programs, and he recently scheduled some visits. Gonzaga is not among the visits. Now, Gonzaga is on his top 9, which is great, but unless he comes to campus, he's probably not going to commit to Gonzaga. Fogle and Haralson are the closest positionally to each other. They're both 6'6", 6'7". They're both kind of guard wing hybrids. I don't think that, like, Fogle wouldn't take playing time from Haralson. If Haralson were to decide to come to Gonzaga, he would play and Fogle would get less playing time. That's what would happen. That's the reality of that situation, unless Fogle somehow outplays him. But that seems unlikely just based on where they are in the recruiting rankings. But I think this is a move for Gonzaga because they're not anticipating Jalen Haralson coming to campus. So to me, this is a continued assumption that Haralson is not going to be a Zag. And I think this is a move by the staff that kind of indicates that as much. Next up, Isaiah Harwell. Harwell is a little bit more on ball than Davis Fogle, at least than I would project them to be at Gonzaga. I think that this recruitment doesn't impact Isaiah Harwell, but it could create a logjam of guards if Harwell were to commit for 2025, because Harwell's going to play right away. He's a top 10, top 15 prospect in that 2025 recruiting class from Wasatch Academy in Utah. He's initially from Idaho. He's going to play right away. And if he's playing right away and you have Braeden Smith playing right away, who's redshirting this season, who's going to take over as the team's starting point guard, replacing Ryan Nembhard right away in 2025-26. So you have your starting point guard in place in Braeden Smith. You would have Isaiah Harwell probably as your starting combo guard or 2 guard. You also have Dusty Stromer likely back in the mix. You potentially have Steele Venters back in the mix. You also have Emmanuel Innocenti from Tarleton State, who's going to probably not play a big role this upcoming season, but could be primed for a bigger role in 2025-26. That's a lot of mouths to feed, and it'll be interesting to see what would happen in that situation. Would Innocenti still be buried on the bench? Would Fogle be a guy who doesn't play all that much as a freshman? Mark Few doesn't play freshman all that much, so it's not exactly a shocker if Davis Fogle isn't, starting and playing 20 minutes a game as a freshman. That would be unusual. Dusty Stromer did that only because of Steele Venters' injury. So Harwell, I think, is still very much a strong target for Gonzaga, still somebody who I think is likely to end up in Spokane. Cal is making a big push right now. He's got a close family connection on the coaching staff for the Golden Bears. They're now in the ACC, which I think helps from a recruiting perspective. So we'll see if Gonzaga can land him over that poll that is being made right now in Berkeley for Cal. But certainly Harwell, Fogle can absolutely coexist for Gonzaga, both as freshmen in that 25-26 season. And I don't think that this recruitment really changes anything there, but certainly something to keep a close eye on. And then there's Nik Khamenia. Nik Khamenia is a 4, a small ball 4, 6'6", or 6'7", 6'8". I think he'd play kind of the 3 we've seen from Corey Kispert. We're expecting to see this year from Michael Ajayi. We saw a little bit of from Julian Strother as well. So it's not really an impact. I do think Fogle will play some minutes at the 3. So if Khamenia was playing at the 3, they would kind of overlap a little bit, but they're fairly different players. I don't think that that's going to be a significant alteration to the recruitment of Khamenia, a player that Gonzaga has been involved with for a really long time. He's been at the last 2 Craziness in the Kennel events, unofficial visit in 2022, official visit in 2023, has yet to make a commitment, has yet to even release a top list. I know some Gonzaga fans are getting antsy waiting to hear what's going on with Khamenia. We know the other California schools are invested in him, USC, UCLA. He's getting he's getting offers from all of the big programs in college basketball. He is a very highly sought after player right now. I don't blame him for waiting, as he is still getting offers pouring in from the likes of North Carolina and the whatnots there, but certainly a player that Gonzaga has been invested in for a very long time. And if he were to reward them for being in on him early and getting him on campus and really kind of expressing that desire to have him be a Bulldog, he would be a tremendous addition to this 2025 class. If Gonzaga can land 2 of these 4, they already landed 1 in Fogle. Fogle and Khamenia, great class. Fogle and Harwell, excellent class. Fogle, Harwell, Khamenia, that's the lottery. That's the goal there. Obviously, Haralson is just absolute icing if they could find a way to get him. But if they can land these 3 guys in that 2025 class, and part of it is the uncertainty about, is Steele Venters going to come back? Is Graham Ike going to come back? But you just don't know. In this era, like anybody on Gonzaga's roster who could return next year could also enter the transfer portal. So it's just, that hasn't happened to Gonzaga all that much, certainly not as much as other programs have surprise entrances into the transfer portal. Gonzaga has been very good at avoiding having that be an issue. But at the end of the day, you can't make a lot of decisions right now based on what you think the future roster is going to look like, because you just don't know. You just don't know. And it's silly to put too many eggs in that basket. So what is Davis Fogle's role going to look like? Again, we kind of touched on it already, but it really does depend on what of those situations happen. I expect Davis Fogle to contribute to Gonzaga in year 1. I don't think he's going to redshirt. I don't think he's going to be outside of the rotation. Now, it's not insane for players not super high regarded freshmen to be out of the rotation in year 1. Julian Strother was not really in Gonzaga's rotation as a freshman. Dominic Harris was not in Gonzaga's rotation as a freshman. Both those guys were top 50, 60 prospects in their respective recruiting classes. So it's not like it doesn't happen. Braden Huff was a top 100 prospect. He wasn't as highly regarded as Fogle, but he redshirted as a freshman. Dusty Stromer wasn't expected to play as big of a role as he did, and he was around the same spot in the rankings as Davis Fogle is. So if we know that Braeden Smith and Emmanuel Innocenti and probably very, very likely Dusty Stromer are all going to be big-time contributors for Gonzaga in the guard wing rotation for the 25-26 season. If Steele Venters is also back, and if Isaiah Harwell commits, that's 5 guys for those spots right there. Fogle is in that mix, but where does he play? If Smith's starting at the 1, if Harwell's starting at the 2, if Venters and Stromer are battling to start at the 3, Innocente's coming off the bench, Fogle's probably coming off the bench as well. The biggest lock that we have for the 25-26 season is Braeden Smith starting at the 1. Outside of that, it's hard to know. If we don't land Isaiah Harwell, if Steele Venters does decide to move on from his college career after this upcoming season, then you have Braeden Smith at the 1, you have Emmanuel Innocenti, you have Dusty Stromer, you have Davis Fogle. You'll probably land some other transfers to kind of fill out some depth in those spots, but that gives you an opportunity for pretty big minutes right away as a freshman. So it's unclear exactly what that role is going to look like. I expect him to be a player who needs to fill out physically, who needs some time to adjust to his role, to adjust to playing at the collegiate level. I think the move to Compass Prep is going to help him quite a bit in that regard. But again, if he struggles at Compass, that's a good sign that he may take a little bit more time before he's ready to be a big time contributor for Gonzaga. And that's okay. It's not a big deal. Gonzaga is not counting on him to immediately be a contributor for this team right away. That's not something that they're expecting from him. If he balls out at Compass Prep and rockets up the rankings, then ends up in the top 15, top 20 in the 2025 class, which I'm not saying is likely, but I'm also not saying it's impossible. It could absolutely happen for him if he finds his physicality and is able to finish more around the rim, and thrives in more of an off-ball role. If that happens, then yeah, maybe he does end up stepping into a bigger role right away. My ultimate guess is he's going to play a smaller role than Dusty Stromer did as a freshman, but not dramatically smaller. 10, 12, 14 minutes a game, something like that, coming off the bench. Some games he plays very little. Some games he plays a little bit more because they're winning way big at halftime. That kind of thing is my expectation. But again, there are a lot of moving parts that are going to be determined between now and the first game of the 2025 season. So it's hard to know exactly what Fogle's role is going to look like. Well, folks, we're moving on to our final topics of the show. Drew Timme has a new team as Summer League approaches. We'll talk about that. The Gonzaga women added a former player to their coaching staff, as well as a former All-American. All that coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, Game Time, folks. It is middle of the major and minor league baseball season. As somebody who lives 10 minutes away from the Hillsboro Hops, I love being able to make a last minute decision to go get a beer and a hot dog and head out to the ballpark. That's why I use Game Time, because prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with their killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat feature, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's concerned about buying tickets from a third-party app that they might not be real, you might get turned away at the door. The nice thing is Game Time's ticket coverage has the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. I personally love having that peace of mind. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code Locked On College for $20 off. 2 tickets, Hillsboro Hops, $25. You get them for $5. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, folks, closing out the show today with a couple other updates for you regarding Gonzaga basketball. We start with Drew Timme, Gonzaga legend, all-time leading scorer, All-American. You all know Drew Timme. He has signed with the Sacramento Kings for Summer League. Again, Summer League takes place in California and Las Vegas. Sacramento, interestingly, has 2 rosters, one for California's league, one for the Las Vegas league. It'll be interesting to see if Drew ends up playing in both spots or not. He is currently on the roster for the California League. Their first game is July 10th. Summer League is just an opportunity for basically lengthy tryouts for two-way spots, for Exhibit 10 contracts, for opportunities to join the team in training camp and eventually either make the camp and be with the NBA squad, get a two-way contract and be in the G League and splitting time in the NBA, or to just be kind of signed with that team in the G League and get an opportunity to play for that squad and potentially make it up to the big league roster. Drew Timme joins the team with 2 players named Ellis, 2 players named Jones, all somewhat familiar for Gonzaga fans. Boogie Ellis played at USC. Keon Ellis played at Alabama. Both played against Gonzaga. Isaac Jones played at Washington State. And then Colby Jones played at Xavier. A handful of other players, of course, on that roster as well. The head coach, by the way, Doug Christie, former Pepperdine legend. So some WCC love going on there for Sacramento's California Summer League roster. The report for Drew Timme is that the foot injury he suffered that cost him the last half or so of the Wisconsin Herd G League season last year has healed quicker than anticipated, and he's about ready to go. So that's great news for Drew that he's going to be able to participate in Summer League. Missing Summer League for Drew would be, the word that came to my head is catastrophic. That's probably too strong of a word to use here, but it would not be good if you're trying to make an NBA roster and obviously the momentum for Drew Timme coming off of a fantastic senior season at Gonzaga, breaking the school's all-time record, making the All-American team, like the momentum that he had coming into last season was really high, and he still went undrafted. He still didn't get a ton of playing time in Summer League, and he still got relegated to the G League and didn't really get a lot of looks as a potential NBA player. not getting to play in summer league your second pro season would be very devastating in terms of teams getting a chance to see your growth, see your development, and really give you a realistic opportunity of playing in the NBA. So the fact that he is reportedly healthy and is good to go is monumental for Drew. This is huge. He played 25 games last year with the Wisconsin Herd in the G League. He last suited up in late January, so he has been out since late January with that foot injury. In those 25 games with the Herd, he averaged 9.5 points, 1.7 assists. He shot 41% from three. Now, it was a low volume, but still, the biggest thing, and it's a very reminiscent of the conversations we had about Anton Watson leading up to the draft. You need to prove you can space the floor in the modern NBA. You have to be able to do it. Drew has elite footwork around the rim. He is outstanding at finishing through contact. He has deft touch with both hands, but he needs to be able to step out and space the floor, and he needs to improve his lateral mobility to be a better NBA defender and not just utilized in drop coverage. The foot injury probably slowed him down in that regard, but if he can improve as a three-point shooter and consistently knock down shots from beyond the arc, that's going to help him dramatically at the next level. We'll continue to update on Summer League. Right now, the only two confirmed players are Anton Watson for Boston, Drew Timme for Sacramento. I expect Julian Strother will play for Denver. They have not finalized their roster as I'm recording this. Some other guys who could end up in the Summer League in some capacity, Malachi Smith, I think could end up there. Potentially, we could see Jeremy Pargo. We could see David Stockton. We could see Admon Gilder. We could see Ryan Woolridge. Like, there's a handful of guys who could end up getting those opportunities in the Summer League, and we'll keep you up to date on here as soon as we can. Last update on the show today, the Gonzaga women's basketball staff has added a pair of coaches to Lisa Fortier's staff. One of them is a former player, Jasmine Redmond. She joined the staff coming from Fresno State, where she was the director of basketball operations. Jazzy played at Gonzaga from 2010 to 2014. She was the WCC Defensive Player of the Year in 2013 and an honorable mention in 2014. She's number 6 all-time for Gonzaga in assists and steals. She played professionally for 3 seasons in Germany, Greece, and Denmark, and has been in Spokane since then, coaching at Meade High School, coaching at University High School, and then going down to Fresno State to be the director of basketball ops. Fantastic player to have back in the mix on the coaching staff for Coach Fortier. They also add Chantel to the staff. She's considered a rising star in the coaching ranks. This is a tremendous hire for Gonzaga. She was on a 30 under 30 list, 30 coaches under the age of 30 who are kind of, again, rising stars in the industry. She was named on that list last year in 2023. She played at Washington. She was actually an All-American in the 2017 season, drafted by the Chicago Sky, and then ended up getting back into the coaching ranks. Pro career didn't last very long, but she did have coaching experience at Drake, and then she was at Arkansas for 2 years, and she's been at Oklahoma for the last few years, has done some really great work at Oklahoma. That's how she ended up on those lists as a rising star. Now she heads to Spokane. She comes back to the state of Washington. Coach Fortier acknowledged, wanting to have a coach who doesn't necessarily have Gonzaga experience, who has experience from other places, who can bring that with them to the staff. She's been to a Final Four as a coach. There's a lot of excitement about bringing Chantel onto the staff here. So between her and Redmond, really nice pair of additions for this coaching staff. Really excited to see what they can do next year. Obviously, Yvonne coming back is a massive step. They had some great transfers in the portal. They got some other players coming back into the mix as well, some incoming freshmen, including Lauren Whitaker, who could be really good right away. We'll get more into this women's basketball team later in the summer here as we get a better sense of what this roster is going to look like, but there's a lot of excitement building for the Lady Zags in Spokane. It's going to wrap it up for me today and for this week. Thanks again to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners as well. Be back next week, continuing to talk Summer League basketball, recruiting, continue to talk about Drew Timme and the women's basketball team, all sorts of fantastic stuff. And then the Olympics coming around the corner. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk about the Olympics and what it means for Gonzaga. All that coming up next week. Until then, have a safe and fun weekend, Zag fans. And as always, go Zags.